So in this video, we're going to be factoring quadratics in the form ax squared plus bx plus c, where we do have a number in front of the x squared, so a does not equal 1. Okay, we're going to be using greatest common factor, then we'll be using guess and check in this video, so our answers are going to look like this. But before we get into factoring, let's do a quick review of multiplication. So you could distribute the 2 first, 2 times 3x, 2 times 4, and then FOIL the remaining binomials, or you can multiply the binomials first foiling and then distribute last. That's the way we'll do it on this video because that's the way we're going to end up factoring these, okay? So here we go, FOIL first, right? So the 2 just stays. Now we do the first, 3x times x, 3x squared, 3x times 5, 15x. Now the 4 times x is 4x, and 4 times 5 plus a 20 there. Now we do add like terms. 2 stays. Parentheses, right? And then we got the 3x squared. We have 2 x terms here, 15x plus 4x. That's going to make 19x. And then we have the constant term plus 20 there. Now, how do you do this in your head so that way you just skip this step entirely? Well, the firsts you write down and the lasts you write down. And then the only part that you have to do in your head was this outers and inners, the 15x plus 4x. So you just do 3x times x, write that down. And then 4 times 5, write that down. And then 3x times 5, 15, plus 4x makes 19x. So that's how you would skip this step here with all the colors on it right there, okay? Next up, distribute the 2. Here we go. 2 times 3x squared, 6x squared, 2 times 19x, 38x, and then 2 times 20, 40 goes there. And there it's all FOILed out, multiplied, or expanded, however, whatever the instructions are. Now, for this video, we are doing this procedure, but backwards, okay? So our questions are going to look like this, and then our answers are going to look like this up here. So remember what factoring is. Factoring is when we're taking an expression and rewriting it as factors. Factors are things being multiplied. So we're rewriting it as things being multiplied, okay? So we're going to start with something like this, quadratic, right? Where we have this plus this plus this, and then we're going to undistribute the greatest common factor. So our next stage is going to look like this. We got a number times a quadratic, okay? And then this part here, we're going to factor further. We're going to unfoil it using guess and check method for this video, okay? So we'll have that number there times this binomial times this binomial. So it's this times this times this. It's rewritten as things being multiplied. Now do pay attention because at the end of the video, I have a quick time saver that will make your guessing and checking go a lot faster. So pay attention to the end of the video. Before we get into actually factoring some quadratics in this video here, let's back up and just look at the easiest method or procedure for factoring different types or styles of quadratics. So for number 1, if you notice there's just a 1x squared here, it's a 1, there's no number in front of the x squared, so there's a 1 of them, so we basically call that an a equals 1. So when we go to factor that, we're just going to go x plus and x plus in our parentheses, and then this number here, these two numbers here, the lasts, they are going to multiply to 6 and they're going to add to a 5. So figure out those numbers, put those in there, boom, and done. For number 2, notice that there is a number in front of the x squared. So this means that the a does not equal 1. It equals, in this case, 2. Now also notice that a 2 divides into the 10 and the 12. So 2 divides all 3 of these. They have a common factor. So basically what you're going to do is undistribute the 2 from all 3 terms. So divide by 2, divide by 2, divide by 2. So now we have it looks like this. And then the 2 stays. And now what we're going to do is this x squared plus 5x plus 6, we're going to factor same as what we did right up here. And for the bottom quadratic, notice that there's also a 2 in front of the x squared. So a does not equal 1. However, this 2 does not divide the other 2 terms. So it does not have a greatest common factor. So you're doing a doesn't equal 1. And there's several different ways of doing it. This video is going to be on guess and check. And so our answer is going to look like this. And then we're going to be guessing pairs of numbers that multiply to 15. And then when you do the outers and the inners, those add to 11. You can also use like a bottoms up method or a grouping method if you want to as well. So here we're going to factor 15x squared plus 81x plus 30. Here we go, right? So first off, is there a greatest common factor? We start all of our factoring with this question here. Is there a greatest common factor? Indeed, there is. So what number can divide 15, 81, and 30? Well, that's going to be a 3. They're all divisible by 3. Okay, so in this case, we're going to go ahead and do that. We're going to undistribute the 3. Okay, so our next stage or step is going to look like this, 3 and then parentheses, and now we divide out that 3, right? So we have 15x squared divided by 3. That's going to make a 5x squared. 81x divided by 3 is going to make 27x. And then 30 divided by 3 makes 10. Okay, so next up, now we keep unfoiling this part right here. Okay, so we're still going to have the 3, and then we're going to have the 2 parentheses after that, right? Now the firsts on this case have to multiply to a 5 or 5x squared, right? So we got the x's already. So for the coefficient, 5 and a 1, 5's prime. So you only got one choice, 5 and 1. So we got a 5 for this coefficient, 5x there, and just x there or 1x there. And then the last, these 2 blanks that we have here, those are going to multiply to a 10. Okay, so here's our options, right? We can go 1 times 10. We can go 2 times 5. And that's pretty much it. But remember that since we have different coefficients here, that the order does matter, right? So 10 and 1 is another one, and then 5 and 2 is the 4th one there. And now we just start doing our guesses. So we're going to start with this one here, the 5 and the 2. Here we go. So a 5 goes there and a 2 goes there. And now we remultiply or FOIL, multiply the binomials to find out, is this true, right? So our guess is 5, 2, and now we check, okay? So we already know that 5x times x makes 15, or 5x squared there, and then 5 times 2 already makes 10. All of these already multiply to 10, so we don't even have to worry about the first and the lasts. We're only going to worry about the inners and the outers, right? So the outers, 5x times 2 is going to be 10x, and then we have a 5 times x there. Now what are we shooting for? We're shooting for this 27x there, right? So 5x plus 10x, does that make 27? No, it doesn't. So we know 5 and 2 is not part of the answer there, or the factors, right? So let's try another one. Okay, let's go ahead and try 2 and 5. Here we go. So we put a 2 there and a 5 there. We don't have to check the first or the last. We're just checking the inners and the outers. So 5x times 5, 25x. 2 times x, 2x there. 25 plus 2, does that make 27? Yes, it does. So there's our factors there. We have 3 times 5x plus 2 times x plus 5. Factored all the way. So let's have you go and try this one out on your own. Pause the video, then come on back and see how you did. So here we go. We're going to factor 10x squared minus 35x plus 30. Now on every one of these, do check first, is there a greatest common factor that we can undistribute? Is there a number that divides 10, 35, and 30? And yes, there is. It's a 5, right? So we're going to divide out or undistribute the 5. So our next stage is going to look like this, where the 5 is going to be out in front and then parentheses, and then 10x squared divided by 5 makes 2x squared, negative 35x divided by 5 makes a negative 7x, 30 divided by 5 makes a plus 6 there. Okay, so that greatest common factor undistribute step is done. Next up, unfoil, right? So the 5 stays, and then we're going to have our parentheses there, right? X times x to make x squared, and then the coefficients have to multiply to a 2, right? In this case here, there's only one option because 2 is prime. That's going to be a 2 and a 1. So we're going to start with a 2x and an x. Now for our lasts, those are going to have to multiply to a positive 6, and they're going to add to a negative 7, right? Negative 7 right there. So with these ones, negative times negative is going to make a positive, and then negative plus a negative is going to make a negative 7 in this case here. So we know that both of these multiplies to 6 numbers. Both have to be negative, right? So it can be a negative 1 and a negative 6 if you're making a list, right? Negative 2, negative 3. And then because we have different coefficients here for our firsts, we do need to reverse those as well. Negative 6, 1 and negative 3, 2. And now we just start guessing, right? So here we go. We'll guess the negative 2, negative 3 first, right? So now we refoil or multiply the binomials to check to see if our guess is correct. So here we go. We already know that the 2x times x, the firsts are good, and negative 2 times negative 3 makes a positive 6. We already know first and last are good. So now we're just checking our outers and our inners to make sure those add to a negative 7x there. So here we go. 2x times negative 3 makes a negative 6x. Negative 2 times x makes negative 2x. Negative 6 and negative 2 add to negative 8x. So nope, that's not going to be the answer there. We're hoping for a negative 7. So let's try another one. Let's try the negative 3, negative 2. Here we go. First and last are already good. Just checking outers and inners. 2x times x makes negative 4x. Negative 3 times x makes negative 3x. Negative 4x, negative 3x does make negative 7x. So there's our factored form there. So now we're going to factor 21x squared minus 120x minus 36. Remember with these, always check to see, is there a greatest common factor that we can undistribute? In this case, all three of these terms can be divided by 3, so that's what we are going to undistribute. So our next step is going to look like this. We're going to have that 3 and then parentheses, and then we're going to divide out that factor of 3. So 21x squared divided by 3 makes 7x squared minus 120x divided by 3 minus 40x minus 36 divided by 3 is a minus 12. Next step is we keep the 3. And now we're going to factor or unfoil what's in these parentheses here. So we're starting with our parentheses with the x's up in front. Now looking at the coefficients, right? This number times this number should equal 7 or 7x squared if you're thinking with the x's there. So there's only one option. It's going to be a 7 and a 1. So we have a 7x and a 1x for our firsts. Now our lasts, they need to multiply to a negative 12. So we can go 1 and negative 12. We can go 2 and negative 6. We can go 3 and negative 4. Now we can switch things up again, right? We can switch the negative from the 12 onto the 1, the negative from the 6 onto the 2, the negative from the 4 onto the 3. Now, since we do have different coefficients in our firsts, a 7 and a 1, we also need to switch the order of these. So instead of a 1 negative 12, it's a negative 12 1. Negative 2 negative 6, 6 negative 6 2, and then same thing with the 3 and the 4 is there. And then we can also, from this group here, we can also switch the order of those numbers as well. So there's the list of guesses for guess and check method that we can use. So next up, just take a guess. Well, let's try the negative 3, 4. So we put negative 3 in and plus 4. So now we are foil this back or remultiply these binomials to check to see if it makes this original one here. So now real quick, we already know the 7x times x is going to make 7x squared, and negative 3 times positive 4 makes a negative 12. We don't need to check the firsts and the lasts for FOIL. We're just checking the outers and the inners and making sure that they add to negative 40. So here we go. 7 times 4, 7x times 4 is 28x. Negative 3 times x, negative 3x. Now, do those add up to a negative 40? No, they make a positive 25x. So we know it's not negative 3, 4. Let's try another one. Let's try negative 2, 6. So here we go. 7x minus 2, x plus 6. We already know first and last are good, so we're checking the outers and the inners. 7x times 6 makes 42x. Negative 2 times x makes negative 2x. So when we add these up, do we get negative 40? No, but we do get a positive 40. So we're just going to switch this to a plus and this to a minus, and we'll be done. So we know it's not negative 2, 6. Instead, it's a positive 2, negative 6. Now, quick double check. Is it the outers and the inners? 7x times negative 6, negative 42. 2 times x, 2x. Do those add to a negative 40? Yes, they do. So our factors is 3, 7x plus 2, and x minus 6. Have you go ahead and try this one out on your own. Pause the video, then come on back and see how you did. Here we go with factoring 6x squared plus 28x minus 48. With all of these quadratics, when we are factoring them, check, is there a greatest common factor? Is there a number that divides all three of these terms? Yes, there is. They're all even, so they can be divided by 2. So we are going to undistribute a 2 from each of those terms. So our next step is going to look like this, 2 and then parentheses here. And then 6x squared divided by 2 is going to make 3x squared. 28x divided by 2, a plus 14x, and then a minus 48 divided by 2 makes minus 24. Now our next step, we're going to keep the 2, and then we're going to unfoil what's in this parentheses here. So it's going to look like this, the double parentheses with our x's out in front. Now these x's, the coefficients need to multiply to make a positive 3. So only one option there, a 3 and a 1. So we're going to have a 3x for the firsts on this one and a 1x for our firsts on the second parenthesis factor. Now, our lasts need to multiply to a negative 24. So lots of options with that. We can go positive 1 and negative 24, 2 and negative 12, 3 and negative 8, 4 and negative 6. And then we can switch the negative on all of those. And then because we have a 3x and an x different coefficients for our firsts, we also need to switch the order. So the 24 can go out in front there. And so we have that group there. And then the last column or group of guesses that could be there. Now, I am going to show a shortcut if you don't like making the lists, but as a side note, write this list down once in your notes, and that way you never have to make the list again. So you can just go straight to guessing. So here we go. So now we're going to start guessing, and then we'll check, right? So we're going to guess negative 12 and 2. So negative 12 and a positive 2. Now we refoil these back out, except we already know that the firsts, 3x and x, already multiply 3x squared. We don't need to check the firsts. The lasts, all of these, including the negative 12 and 2, already multiplied to a negative 24. So we're just checking the outers and the inners and making sure they add to a positive 14. So here we go. 3x times 2 makes 6x. Negative 12 times 2 makes negative 12x. Add those up. Do they make a plus 14x? No, they don't. They make a negative 6x. So we know negative 12 and 2, not part of our answer there, or our factors. Let's try another one. Let's try negative 4 and 6. Here we go. Negative 4 and 6. First and last are good. Just checking the outers and the inners. 3x times 6, 18x. Negative 4 times x, negative 4x. Add those up. 18x minus 4x's does indeed make 14x's. So there is our list of factors. 2 times x, 3x minus 4 times x plus 6. Stay tuned because we have a shortcut coming up here, or a faster way of doing this. So let's say you get to this stage here and you're like, you know what? I don't want to make this big list. I just want to start guessing. Well, here's a systematic way to make those guesses so you don't repeat the same guess over and over again. So we're going to guess. We already know the 3x and the x multiply 3x squared. So now we're just guessing numbers that multiply to a negative 24. So first guess, plus 8 minus 3. Now remember, we already know they multiply to a negative 24. Don't have to check that. We already know the firsts are good there, so we're still just checking the outers and the inners. We're only focused on the coefficients here. We're not worried about the x's, okay? Because we're looking for just a 14, right? So we got 3 times negative 3. That makes negative 9 for the outers, and then 8 times 1 is just an 8, all right? So in our brains, we have a negative 9 and a positive 8. Well, that makes negative 1. We're looking for a 14. So here we go. Next guess. And again, just random numbers if you want. We're going to guess a plus 6 and a negative 4. Now we're just checking the outers and the inners. So here we go. 3 times negative 4, that's a negative 12. And then the inners is going to be 1 times 6 is 6. Negative 12 and 6, it's going to make negative 6. We're hoping for 14. That's not it. Let's try another one. Here we go. Let's try 4 and negative 6. So the outers, 3 times negative 6, that's a negative 18 right there. And then a 4, negative 18 and 4 is going to make negative 14. Oh, we're so close. We were hoping for a positive 14. We got a negative 14. So just switch that plus to a minus and that minus to a plus, and that'll be our last guess. It's actually going to be the right one. And again, just checking the outers and the inners. 3 times 6, that's a positive 18. 4 times 1, negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Adds up to make a positive 14, and boom, there you go. So quick recap with this, anytime we are factoring these quadratics here, check to see if it has a greatest common factor, or is there a number that we can divide each of these 3 by. Now in this case there is, we can divide by 3. So that's what we're going to undistribute from each of the 3 terms there. So our next step is going to start with this 3 here, goes there, and then divide by 3, divide by 3, divide by 3. Now what's in the parentheses here, that's going to be the 2 parentheses unfoil style, right? So the 3 stays, boom, boom, right? And then we know that the firsts have to be 2x squared when multiplied. So 2x and x are the only options. And then for the lasts, those are going to multiply to a negative 6. So you can just start guessing right away, or you can make the list, but here's going to be your list of guesses, right? Multiplies to a negative 6. We can go 1 and negative 6. We can go 2 and negative 3. We can switch the negative on these, right? So it'll look like that. And that's because we have different firsts right? We have a 2x and an x. We have different firsts. Then we can also switch the order of the actual numbers, like these ones switched here to here, and then these ones switched here to here. So instead of -1, 6, it's 6, -1. And then you just start making your guesses. Remember, the first and last are good. You don't even have to worry about that. They're always going to multiply to a -6 for the lasts, and the firsts are always going to multiply to a 2x squared. So you're just checking the outers and the inners to make sure that they end up equaling the b or the x term. In this case, that would be a -1 when you're checking those. Now, quick note, when you're doing these and you're making lists, or you just copy them straight off the video in your notebook, keep them in your notebook. That way, the next time you have a -6 for your c term, you already have the list made. You can just start making guesses like what we did on the last segment, okay? Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave it a like. If you didn't like the video, hit the dislike button twice just to make sure.